back, looters. Today we're talking about playtesting. And what is a playtest? It's playing your game so that you can test it.
Yes, it. Video over. No. So it's playing your game in order to see if all the mechanics and all the items working together are fun and work the way you intended and designed.
Right. Making sure that the play experience, that end experience that we always talk about, making sure that you're making good on that promise of the end experience.
And the key is that you want it to start fun, build up in the middle, and end good.
Right. Having a satisfying payout at the end.
Yep.
So that's the long and short of it. Now the question is, are there different kinds of playtests, or do you just play your game over and over again? And of course, you don't just want to be playing your game by yourself or with your small group of friends 100 times until you're like, yes, this game is done, complete. So normally the way we would start this is playing it together or in a small group of people that we know and aren't afraid of looking at our ugly game. And you play it and you make sure that it's pretty smooth, and then you would maybe take it to a different group of maybe some friends or your family and play it with them and see what they think and get a little bit more experience with people who maybe aren't game designers, or with a different group of people who are game designers who can give you some more feedback, and slowly sort of expanding from your close group to people that you trust to eventually complete strangers who maybe would be the core demographic of your game.
Some people in some areas of the country, they have like core game groups that are like groups of people who come together weekly or monthly,
Right.
and play each other's games as they're like building and developing them. And it's good to find a group like that, even if you have to go 20 minutes or an hour away in order to get to that, because number one, you get to see what other games are playing, and you have people who are a core group that you can always like slap your game down on the table with
and get some eyes on it that have some other game experience and maybe a broader scale of their knowledge.
And the other nice thing about it is that a lot of times, because then you're connected with like the game community, is that a lot of times they'll know people who own the local game shop, or they'll know they are the people who own the local game shop.
Right.
And so you'll be able to tap into their wider community. And that's the big thing. That's the push, is getting able to get your game in front of those people, because they're not at the normal group that you go to, but they're just one group away.
And then there's sort of two main types of playtests, which we'll call guided and unguided. Some people call it blind playtesting. I personally prefer unguided because it tells you exactly what that means. So in a guided playtest, you're there and you're helping the people learn the rules, and you can correct them if someone forgets something, or if they don't really know what a good move is, you can kind of help them out. Versus an unguided playtest, where you have your rules written down and you hand it off to a group and say, here you go, play this game and tell me what you think. So those are sort of the two major ways of getting your game play tested, and you can get different kinds of feedback from it. Typically you would start with the guided and then move to the unguided once you feel like you have that down. And there's lots of different things that you need to keep in mind. For guided, it's really good to practice your teaching skills, make sure that you can communicate in a way verbally that is clear and easy to understand to people, versus unguided, where you need to work on making sure your rules are written well and are understandable. They don't necessarily need to be formatted, but if you hand this off to people, they're going to understand what language you're using in terms of like, if you flip over this card, where do you put it? Do you flip it over and just keep it on top of the deck? Do you put it in the middle of the table? Making your rules understandable in a way that someone could just pick up the rule book and play the game.
One of the things you have to understand versus guided versus unguided is you're really also playtesting different things. So in the guided, you're playtesting more of, does the mechanics work? Does the is the fun? Is it fun? Are people enjoying themselves? You need to kind of know what you're trying to get out of the playtest in order to get what you're trying to get that. Unguided, what you are testing in an unguided game is, did I write the rule book in such a way that
people can
follow and understand it? And is the iconography on the cards or tiles or dice or whatever, are those done in such a way that people can very easily understand and read and figure out without having you sitting there telling them the rules as you go?
Actually, you brought up something really interesting, which is you can play test a game looking for different things. So a lot of times you'll see this if you sit down to playtest with other designers, people will be like, what are you looking for in this playtest? Are you looking for, does it work? Like, does the game function? You might be looking for, oh yeah, we're graphics. We're pre-graphics right now. I just want to make sure that, it all plays normally. You might be saying, we're looking at making sure our graphics work right now. So where does your eye go to? Does all of this iconography make sense? Do you understand what pieces are meant to work together? You could be testing for the flow moving into the end game and making sure that the points work. There's lots of different individual pieces, and maybe you're looking for all of that because you're starting broad right now and it's the beginning of you play testing, but maybe at the end you're like, you know what, there's just this one little rule that I'm not really sure about, and that's really what I'm looking for. So you play and I'll be watching for that one corner case or like this one piece to move or happen or whatever.
And one of the things that when you're designing a game and you're sitting down to get the playtesters and you've got them going, is that you have a hard time with is, do I let them in on what it is I care about, or should I just see what they say? In other words, is it better to hear what they say?
Point out the obvious thing.
Is it better to point out the thing and be like, what I really want to know is, did you enjoy the fact that everyone lost but this one person? And it's like, do you address the elephant and say, this is what I really want to know. Here's my thing. I really want to know, did you have fun as you lost? Because let's say there's some reason that it's supposed
there's a traitor mechanic.
Yeah, you're supposed it's supposed to be a comedy, funny game, but oh, by the way, no one's gonna win. I don't know why.
Did you feel okay about that?
Were you okay with that? Right. I mean,
do you want to ask them ahead of time or at the end of the game? And I think it really depends on, one, what that question is. If it's how did you feel? I wouldn't personally bring it up ahead of time to make them aware of it. But if you're talking about, the graphics and we want to make sure that it's easy to understand, maybe you do ask them ahead of time and say, hey, if you see something weird with the graphics or something, let me know as we're playing. That's what I'm really testing for. So use your best judgment kind of thing, but, think about whether you want to address it ahead of time, like Kari said, or if you want to address it at the end of the playtest.
And some items that you're trying to chart, well, I'm going to use the term chart as in you're trying to get a trend over time of people are liking this thing or not liking this thing. Those kinds of items, you need to make sure you're on your questionnaire sheet.
Right, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But a good way of gathering information from playtesters is giving them a questionnaire, like a survey at the end. And this is particularly prevalent, we've noticed, in like unpublished groups, like there's Unpub and Nunpub and Protospiel, Game Lab, just lots of different groups. It's very common if you're playing a bunch of unpublished games that they'll have some sort of sheet that you can give playtesters to fill out, but personally I find that it's best to make your own. And the reason for this is if a group gives you a playtest sheet, it will be very generic, which can be fine. But if there are specific things you want to chart, like, hey, did you have fun at the end of the game even though there was a traitor and you didn't win? If you notice a lot of people not liking that, it's really good to have that as a question to maybe say to yourself, do we really want to keep that in the game? Do we want to change it? So what kind of questions do you find are helpful to have on a playtesting sheet?
So what's interesting is that I was just thinking about that, like literally a second ago. And what I was thinking about is the fact that a lot of times I find personally that I don't like the questions I get asked on the sheet.
Yeah.
And that's bad.
Well, what would you put? So
that's what I'm saying.
Let's use Candy Squad as
okay.
the case study. What question would you put on the questionnaire for Candy Squad?
First thing first is I'd want to know, which character did you play?
A lot of our games have variable player powers, and so what that means, variable player powers, means that your character has a unique ability that no one else has. So isolating what that person's experience was will give you automatically more information.
Yeah.
If you're playing a character who maybe we're having trouble with one character, it's good to have the information that, oh, we're playing this character, we're looking for a different set of things than if they were playing a completely different character.
And I guess the next thing I'd want to know is if you feel like you should have had more power.
Okay.
So would you have had more fun if you, or do you, in other words, would you feel like you should have more powers, or, heal faster or whatever? And then is there somebody who you thought was overpowered, as in like not you but of the other characters?
Do you feel like the powers weren't even across the board?
Even across the board, right? And then I'd want to know is if there was something you wish that character could have done.
Okay.
But what's interesting is it's really, what this proves is it's really hard to come up with what are actually meaningful questions.
Yeah, I think meaningful
to ask for the group, because there's always going to be a situation in a game what you're playtesting where that particular game just had very interesting things, and you want to write all about this one interesting thing, and you want to be able to and none of the questions will match that,
right,
because that was just your individual game that happened to be the situation that everyone lost in the first round.
Comment section.
No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
And
well, I mean, it's really good to have an extra section at the bottom or the back page blank, just so that people could write down anything extra, or so that you can make notes. Because personally, what I do is I like paperclip everything together from one playtest. If there's a weird case where everyone lost in the first round or within the first 5 minutes, because you want outliers to be so that you have that data, so that you're not like, oh my god, why did everyone hate the game?
Well, yes, exactly.
From this one pile, so that like you can track your data a little bit better.
But what's interesting about that is, me as the player, that's what I want to write about. I want to write about, oh my gosh, everyone lost in the first. So we actually had this one game that we played in a playtest, one of ours actually, where because of just horrid luck, I mean, just like this game was not meant to have this luck, and they actually pulled the item like the 3 of the first 4 times or
Yeah.
something like that. So we literally lost in like card 2.
Yeah, a thing that would not normally ever happen.
Never should happen. So the problem is, as the game players, that's what you want to write about. You're like, oh my gosh, this is horrible,
Right.
horrible thing. But for playtesting purposes, that game is such an anomaly. It actually would never.
It would very rarely
never
happen.
be part of the sheet. You would never even want to be part of the sheet because it doesn't tell you how the game plays overall.
Right.
All it tells you is this one player should never be used for luck purposes, should not buy any lottery tickets because
Right.
they will never win. They should. And that's all it proves to you is that.
Yeah. Sometimes bad things happen during play, and that is a truth. Is sometimes bad things happen during play tests, and it's really important for you, especially if it's a guided play test, to be able to sort of soothe the players and make sure they understand this is not normal.
This is not normal.
This is why it happened, and like this is not normal. You guys got really unlucky.
Yeah.
This does bring me to an interesting point of the industry, though, that I have been told, and I have done, which is sometimes when you want someone to really like your game, and this isn't for playtesting, this is more for demoing later on down the road, but if you really want to sell your game and have people like it and have people have a really good experience, stack the deck in their favor. It will make your demos go a lot quicker. It will have people have a smoother understanding of how the game plays. Don't do this during playtesting because it will not give you good results. But later on down the road, if you have a demo at a convention and you want people to play a 15-minute version of your game, stack the deck so that it does not stretch on. I have made that mistake where my game that normally should take about a half hour to play has taken like over an hour to play because they just had the worst luck, and whoever shuffled it did such a weird job that there's 3 of each potion and they had 3 potions, 3 copies of each one, and none of the rest of them. And I'm just like, this has never happened before, and it has never happened again, but whoever shuffled it just like did something. And so later on down the road we'll talk about, pitching and demoing and all of that stuff. Not this week, but feel free to, if you are really trying to have someone have a good playtest experience, not testing the game for things like gameplay, but maybe for graphics or making sure that this one player power kind of fits in, that's stack the deck. Just do it. It's fine. Who's gonna know? No one. You and me now, and Carrie now also, but we won't tell. It's fine. A question that I really like to ask is, what was the thing that you liked the least? Because it will hurt your ego a lot if they write a lot, but it will also get you thinking about the things that people didn't associate that maybe you want to have in your game, and maybe you'll determine if enough people say, hey, your game has this trader mechanic and we were all having a really good time until that happened. Maybe you need to rethink that. Maybe it doesn't need to have a trader mechanic and you just need to have like a timer or a world deck that has a certain thing happen and that's when the game ends. Maybe you need to like readjust the priorities. So I always ask, what thing did you like the least, to sort of understand where the players are coming from in terms of, this thing is not good, I did not like it, and maybe they say nothing and you're like, oh, good job me. But at least it'll give you an idea about whether your game kind of works cohesively.
Another thing about the unguided games is, and with guiding instructions also is, I personally don't like the questionnaire as much as watching the people and what are they having fun on, what are they not having fun on.
And that's
if there's a
very
part
true.
of the game that's supposed to be really fun and really funny and no one enjoying that spot, you may need to rethink that spot, right? You need to rethink that spot, definitely.
And we've been told, and I think this is very true, it really depends on what kind of game you're making. We tend to design lighter weight, cooperative games where there should be a lot of chatter and people like talking about what's happening in the game and engaging with the game. But if you're designing something that's like a really heavyweight strategy game, maybe people aren't talking a lot and they're like thinking and like making faces and they're like really intense, and like that's what you want. So keep in mind that what that feeling your player should be having, and look for that when they're the most engaged with whatever is happening. Because if one part is like the climax of the game and like things are getting really tense and everyone's just kind of like, what, is it my turn? Like, that's not good. You don't want that. So yeah, I personally find that in the beginning, the questionnaires are really helpful. And once you kind of have the game ironed out a little bit and you're feeling pretty confident about it, I really just like watching people and seeing how they're interacting. And personally, for our kind of games and our cooperative games, what I find really says that people are having fun is when they start using the lingo of your game. So if a person is playing a kid, they start maybe calling themselves by that kid's name, where you're like, oh yeah, so Bunny's gonna go and do this, and like they're speaking through their character. Or using the names of villains and be like, oh man, someone needs to take out this guy really bad, and showing that sort of that they're kind of tied into the world that you've created.
For me, it is more about the interacting and being tied in, and talk, and especially if they start talking to each other. One player talking to another player in such a way of, oh wow, you should do this, or you should do that, or whatever. Those kinds of things, I look for that as my sign. I don't really look for the questionnaire, because for, like I said, and I said this right away, which was, I have found the questionnaires, the questions are usually not great. They're generic, and in the end, whatever questions are on there are not any of the questions you really wish would happen.
So, and I think if that's the case, just make your own. Make sure that you put in whatever questions you were specifically looking for. I always like to add in, like I said, the dislike question. What was the worst part of the game? And sometimes, like, a lot of times it'll have to do with pacing or some action that someone took that kind of screwed you over. And that's fine. I feel like that's, a normal reaction. If one part is lagging because someone is taking forever, it's fine. That's a good, bad, worst part to have. So taking those situations with a grain of salt, and maybe keeping your own notes to keep track of, player A was taking 10,000 years for each turn, so that's an outlier.
Yeah.
And not
not
necessarily not to be trusted, but like understanding where that feedback is coming from.
And I think it's the other reason why I don't like the questionnaires, is because so much of their person's perspective was based on their play, and their play could have been strange. Their play could have been weird. Their play could have involved one person who wasn't really paying any attention to the game. And so therefore, of course they all lost. There's one player who wasn't even paying attention. Yeah. And it's not, I feel sorry for the other players, because they all lost because this one player was not even playing, right, not even trying. I mean, so that's why.
So you prefer to take your own notes?
I prefer to watch. Yeah. I prefer to watch. I prefer the interactions. I prefer that. I totally prefer that. Especially when I start seeing I had one playtest where the group just kept saying to me during the game, I wish I had this, I wish I had this. And so in the end, we changed the game. We added the thing that during the game, they had wished they had had. I mean, I learned more from that than I ever did the sheep.
Yeah. And that's
personally.
Honestly, I think that's a good point. A lot of times people will have forgotten things by the end of the game, especially if it's a fun game. They may not remember what happened at the beginning because they were having so much fun at the end. It's really important to take that feedback as it happens, and make notes about it, because for me, people kept asking for something during my playtests over and over again, and I don't want to say I brushed it off, but there wasn't an easy way of incorporating what they wanted. And this will lead me into the next point I wanted to make. But just because someone gives you feedback, don't take it necessarily at face value. By which I mean, if someone says, hey, I really had fun during this game, but I really wish there was a trading mechanic, but trading does not really work in your game because of X, Y, or Z, don't say, well, now I need to shoehorn trading into my game. Think instead about why they are saying that, what the frustration is that's causing that to be an issue. So for me, people kept saying, I really want trading. Why can't we trade with each other? It's a cooperative game. Why can't I just trade? And because of the way that the economy of the game was, it would make things really unbalanced really quickly. But what they were saying is, really, I want to set my friend up for success, and I feel like I don't have enough opportunity to do that. And it's cooperative, so I want to help them. So instead, I did something where you can give someone something as a free action, but you have to think about it a turn ahead. So it did not unbalance the economy, because maybe it would not be as powerful as if you were able to take something and then just give it to them. So when a player says, hey, I really liked this, but I really dislike the trader mechanic, maybe what they're saying is that thing is overpowered, or I didn't like how it factored in. Maybe you don't need to just remove that, but think about why they're saying it and how you can mitigate that negative effect rather than just scrapping something and doing whatever. Because if you just take out every single thing someone says they didn't like, you're gonna have no game left.
So one thing you do need to watch for in the questionnaire, if you have them.
You probably should, at least in the beginning.
Is like a book or a movie, a game needs to have a good start, middle, and end. If you don't have a good start, no one will play it, because they will walk away after 5 minutes. You got to have a good middle so that the people feel like they have something to keep going for.
Some stakes and
tension. And you have to have a good end. Because if you have a good start and you have a good middle, but it is awful in the end, the only thing they will remember
is the end.
Was the end. And they will talk about how awful the game was because they pulled one card and everyone died.
At the very end.
At the very end.
With no sign of whatever.
No sign that there's going to be a problem, and they pull the Jaws card. And the Jaws card says, you all lose. This was the worst game. This was awful. All because you failed you got to have good 3 parts. Got to have a good hook in the beginning. Got to have stakes in the middle. And you got to have a good final end.
Right. A good resolution.
A good resolution.
When are you done playtesting? When do you feel like you're done playtesting a game?
So, for me, I'm going to say it this way. So, a lot of times you ask an artist, you'll be like, how do you know when you're done with the painting? How do you know when you're done with the drawing? And the answer is, they're not. They never are. I mean, Picasso literally painted on top of paintings because he never got done. And so, consequently, well, more reasons than that, but we'll pretend and say that. But My point is that you're never actually done. It's just at some point you realize that you're not gaining any more information from it. You're not, in other words, you've tried to break it many times, you've tried to do this, you've tried to do that. Is there still gonna, be some,
there's always gonna be the
there's
weird
always gonna
corner
be
case.
unicorns, and what you're looking for is where you're getting more like a trend line, where you're trending to normalcy and you're no longer doing this. Now it's
and you might have the one odd
and
man
you'll have
out.
the one odd.
And there's always going to be the case where someone pulls the 3 cards that kills them in 3 pulls.
3 pulls.
But it'll be 1 in every 100 and not 1 in every 10. Or 1 in every 1,000, not 1 in every 10.
But you do have to make sure. So whereas we just got done telling you, oh, by the way, so you can barely test and go forward. You do have to make sure that you have done it in every scenario, though. So you're going to have to make sure. So we have this game coming someday in the future.
It's our lives. It's just one day.
It's going to ship with, we'll say, 4 characters at the beginning. But we already know it's going to have some other things coming after it.
Right.
Which means that we need to test with all 4 of those characters playing by themselves each, interacting with each other each, in every scenario. So what happens if it's just these 2 characters? What happens if it's just these 2 characters? What happens if it's just those other 2 characters? What if there's only 3 of them? What if there's all 4? And
what if there's all 4 of them, but one is asleep? What if there's 4
and so you have
one isn't paying attention?
Oh, yeah, I know. So the point is that you have to go through and you have to test to that fullness where they're all pretty steady with all of them in order to make sure you don't have any scenarios that are broken. Because it could turn out that in our game it has item cards. It could turn out that there's one item card with one particular character that always breaks the game. So and the hard part is if you have a deck of 100 item cards,
We don't.
Getting that one item card with that one character together in the game, enough plays to know it's broken, is going to be a very difficult thing to do. So, some people, and I'm just going to do something out there for you to research.
Some people.
Actually will develop via game math.
Which sounds made up, but I'm sure
it's
real.
a thing. It's a real thing. It's game math where
Sure.
they talk about game trade economies and things.
Oh yeah.
And they use that in order to find where the outliers could be, to find those spots where you're going to end up in an economy where one character when they get in the math scenario with this other thing will cause too big of a peak. And then they know they have a problem there, and they can tone their game down because they know
or change one
that the new economy when they put those 2 items together has too much math.
Right.
I'm just laying that out there as a topic for of things you could research.
Yeah, personally, depending on what your game is and how many moving, really you want to make sure you test each moving piece, each piece where 2 parts can interact and cause some sort of reaction. Luckily, we've mostly been designing cooperative games. If you are making competitive games, it's going to be even harder because you won't be able to test it by yourself. So make sure that you kind of take into consideration all of those possible scenarios, which may be really difficult. For my game that I am currently designing, Potions and Puppies, I made a chart, graph, playtest sheet that had each and every combination of variable player powers in groups of 3, 4, and 5 And I ran through each one of those scenarios at least 5 times, just to make sure that nothing seemed off, making sure that each power interacted with each other in a way that was fine and not too strong and also not too weak, because you don't want someone to feel like Kari said earlier, you don't want to be like, well, they could do this cool thing and I was sitting here with the poop power where I couldn't do anything except poop. And like, you don't want someone to feel like they bought this game from you and they're like, I have the poop power and all I can do is poop in the corner. Some advice we were given a while ago was, it's not broken if everyone is broken. So shoot for the moon with your powers and you can always scale them back if you need to, but you want to make sure people are having fun, and normally that means giving them almost too much as opposed to not enough and having them be in the poop corner.
Yeah, it's not overpowered if everyone's overpowered.
So then here are some questions that we got from you,
our loyal viewer.
Hey, we have 27 subscribers. Woo! Thanks, guys. You're the real MVPs. We kind of already answered this, but what questions do you ask your playtesters? And I think really it comes back to watching players and seeing what they interact with the best and what they where they're like. Because if they're making this face, like, you know that is not a good part. And actually, I would also say making notes of what people continually ask questions about. If it's something they don't understand, they'll ask you questions, and then you know, like, either this part is too complicated, or I'm not explaining it right, or in an easy to grasp way, and maybe rethink that piece to maybe take out some complexity, or write a player guide so that they have something to reference and look at and be like,
oh yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, so those I think are sort of the main beats. Another question I really liked when we made our first sheet was, how much would you pay for this game? Because that's really telling about their enjoyment level overall, because they're never going to tell you like, no, I wouldn't buy this game. If you're the one who's like, I made this game, they're going to be like, oh yeah, it's great, I would totally buy it. But if they're like, I would pay $15 and your game is going to be like a $60 game, they probably wouldn't buy your game. And so I think that is way more telling in terms of overall enjoyment than just saying, could you rate this 1 to 10 about how much you liked my game? I would say people are always going to be on the nicer end, but I've met some people that want to be on the nicer end. So.
The one big thing that you're actually getting out of that is you happen to know how much your game's going to cost. It's gonna have lots of pieces, and it's gonna have lots of tiles, and it's gonna have a bunch of figurines.
Oh, God.
And the reality is these things are expensive.
Yeah.
So you know that this game is gonna be expensive to produce, and their response is, oh, I'd pay $30 for it, and you're just like, you know that you've got an $80 game.
Right.
So you know that you have to either A, add something to the game to warrant the price, or B, you're gonna have to figure out some cheaper way of doing this.
Right. Maybe making meeples instead of minis, or cut down some of the tiles to make them cards or something. Yeah.
You know you have to adjust the game.
Or maybe that person really just did not like your game.
Or the other thing,
not enough to pay full price for it.
The other thing that you also might be in a situation with is you might realize that you really were trying to make it a more Lux game. And if you were trying to make a more Lux game, maybe maybe people are like, yeah, I would love this for being a more Lux game. Well, then maybe there's something you need to do to make it more Lux.
Right.
Maybe you need to start thinking about variable dice or variable, maybe adding these things also helps with the hook of the game and helps with the, you may be getting all of that based on what people are willing to pay for the game. It just kind of gives you a gauge of, in the spectrum of games, of, this is a 18 card game to some
crazy 300
50-pound,
mini.
300 mini. It tells you where people are kind of like laying it in the tiles,
right.
laying it on this line. And if people want to lay it farther on the line, it also means you're going to need to add more things to it to get it up.
Yeah. Or they'll think they got a deal.
I got a deal.
I would
$18
pay $60 for this game, and it's only $30.
It's a $30 game.
Oh, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. All right. Are there any other questions that you would ask playtesters? Not necessarily even on a questionnaire, but at the end of a playtest. And that's also totally a valid option. Is just like, hey guys, what did you think about blah? And then just recording what people said. So you'll be less likely to get unique responses because people will just like tag onto that and be like, oh yeah, I like that. But maybe they'll give each other ideas too. Like you never know what information you'll get out of people.
That's interesting. This concept of a joint.
Yeah, because if someone said, oh yeah, I really liked this one thing, someone could be like, oh yeah, and because you did that, it did this other thing that I thought was really cool too. And so maybe people can, share the experience that way too.
I mean, for me, I get more out of how much do people write. Like,
okay, that's fair.
No, I mean,
if they wanted to tell you all about how much they liked this one thing versus like, no, I did not like it.
It was okay. Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, I liked it. And so, but what's really bad is, so I'm going to be confession time. I am probably the world's worst playtester.
I will agree with this.
You handed me the questionnaire. What'd you think? It was great. Would you play this again?
But she'll tell you all about it. She won't write it down, but she'll tell you. You will not be able to shut her up once she starts telling you about it.
Oh, I love this part and that part. Da, da, da. Actual writing? It was great. And so, but on the inverse, I'm sure that when I judge people who play tested my game, having been said that I'm the world's worst playtester, is if they don't write a lot of words, I assume it means that they weren't engaged, they didn't like it.
Maybe they just don't like writing. Maybe they have poor penmanship and you can't read what they wrote, which is also Kari.
I have an interesting double standard.
So, okay, this kind of leads into the next question, which is, do you take into consideration what the person does for a living, or if they are a professional game tester or game designer, when you take their feedback? So if you have someone play your game and they're like, I make games for a living, I am in the industry and I make games for a living, and they give you feedback, versus someone who comes up off the street at a convention and is like, I am a contractor, I am a architect, and they give you feedback. Do you treat those two people differently in terms of the feedback that they give you?
Yes. But I'm also going to say why.
Well, that's good, because otherwise that would be not a very good answer.
It's usually better feedback.
If they are in the industry.
Yeah. And the reason why is, it could be, really, it could be a situation where you're playing a game and you could hate the game.
But you can be more objective.
But you can better articulate about what it is. In other words, I may secretly hate this game, but still able to give really good feedback of things like, I love how it turns, or it moves, or
it turns like a clock.
And in other words,
Right.
In other words, what about this game is interesting and engaging
and should be developed
more. In other words, you should trash this whole half of the game, but let's talk about how interesting and engaging this part is.
Right.
And people who are in the industry because they unfortunately because they've had to have people do this to them, they've just
unfortunately.
Well, it's true. That they know how to talk like that.
Right.
Whereas Joe Public, when they come in, it's just, oh yeah, it was fun, or oh yeah, it was enjoyable, or whatever.
Sure.
And
a person who's in the industry can have a more wide frame of reference of other games that do this thing or don't do this thing, or things that you could maybe incorporate better. They just have a wider breadth of experience. I'm going to say something maybe controversial.
Here we go.
I think the other way around is true. More so. I would rather have Joe Public's response in one specific case, and that is if I am near the end of my play, if I'm doing an unguided playtest, I would absolutely prefer knowing what Joe Public has to say about my game, because he or she or they are the one that is buying my game, and not the designer. The designer does not care about my game.
No.
I want to know if the person who is sitting down, who is the contractor or the interior designer or the IT specialist, I want to know if they had fun. I want to see them interacting with my game and seeing what my core demographic person is interested in, and if they are taking to it well. Because the playtester is just going to be like, oh yeah, this is a pretty good deck builder. They're going to come in with a lot more baggage and probably not, I mean, they might be interested in buying my game, but they have so many other things on their plate, they're not going to be the one who is my shield bearer for my game. They're not going to be the person being like, oh my god, this is my go-to game, because they have 10 other go-to games that they're gonna, just because they've played them more, love more than my game.
I think the difference is early versus late.
Absolutely.
Early on, I'm going to prefer the one in the industry, only because even if they're not the core demographic, in fact, it can be like, I'm going to say flat out, this is not, I am not your core demographic.
I say that so much.
But
I'm sorry, other designers who
but they're able to put themselves in the shoes enough of the core demographic that they can kind of like give constructive criticism of, this is the spots that you kind of need to talk about, you need to look into, or this is this part that really worked for me, this didn't. Having
more
that,
objective.
Yeah. Whereas the Joe Public is just going to be like, I didn't like it. Now, later on in the game, that is true though, which is if it isn't, you know, if they're not the core demographic, they're still not the core demographic. They're still not buying your game.
But it's good to know, okay, and this is a thing that I'm going to be talking about from personal experience. We took a game of mine to play test it at a convention, and we had free-for-all signups, and people showed up at the table, and I went, this is not my core demographic. And the second playtest went, and the same kind of people showed up, and I was like, this isn't who I thought was going to be playing my game, because it's lightweight, and all these people are asking me things about like, well, could you add in things to make it longer or heavier weight? And I'm like, it's supposed to be a lightweight game. I don't really want to add in like a health mechanic or mid bosses, and I was just like really nervous.
Make people die. Could they have a chance of dying?
Can we split the group? And I was like, no, that's never been a thing. And so in seeing who gravitated towards the game from those playtests, it made me come to Kari and be like, we need to re-theme this, because people really enjoy it, but they aren't sure what they're getting into just from the name and the snippet that I've given them. The pitch that they were reading wasn't fully connecting. And so now we threw in some puppies, and now it's like right on brand. So don't be afraid to have people give you criticism that says, well, maybe you should add in this one thing, and compare it to what you know about your game. If people want this really crunchy mechanic where it's like, let's add in all this extra strategy and depth, but your game is really meant to be like a family game that's supposed to play in a half hour, you're not going to do that. And that's okay. This person is not your core demographic person, and maybe they would like something else, or maybe they just didn't understand, and that's okay, and that definitely happens. But if you keep seeing that, if it keeps happening, maybe try and understand why you keep getting these people. And maybe it's just that you're going to a place that only has one sort of person, and maybe you need to be going to a game store that has more kids if you're going for a family-friendly game, or like a kids museum. Don't do any of this right now. Pandemic stuff is still happening, but you know what I'm saying. In the future, if you're going out places and testing this game, try and narrow down why your playtesters are not your core demographic. Is it how you're presenting the game? Is it where you're going to find the playtesters? Because there might be a disconnect somewhere. How do I market my game so people will want to play it in the first place? And I'm assuming this means how do I get people to come and playtest my game? How do I get eyes on my game and make people excited about it? A good, quick hook is the most important thing. If you're like, my game is Untitled Game, where come and play a thing about space and ships, you have to have a less than 30-second hook to be like, hey guys, do you want to deal with space murder? And people will be like, yeah, what is that? And I said 30 seconds, 5 seconds. You want to catch people's attention really quickly, but in a way that they won't feel betrayed. If you sit them down and you're like, yes, it is a social deductive 2-hour experience. No, don't. So have your quick 5-second pitch and then be able to follow it up as soon as they sit down. So, hey, do you want to play my game about space murder? And people will be like, heck yeah, I do, and sit down. And you're like, all right, here's what we're doing. You get your phaser card and you're gonna shoot some aliens and pull them into it. But I think the biggest way is to marry the theme of your game as quickly as possible to the mechanics. So if your game is about space murder, you want the people within the first minute that they're sitting down to understand what they're doing to space murder each other. Honestly, the most important thing, to me, the thing that I have the hardest time with is when people sit down to play my game, making sure that I'm not nervous and can speak to them in a way that I'm informing them and keeping it kind of light and loose and not being a weirdo, because I'm really good at that. The weirdo part, not the light and loose part. And so you want them to understand both the flavor and the mechanics of the game as you're teaching it. And I think that's the biggest thing for me in terms of getting people to sit down at the table. What about you? Murder.
My big takeaway for everyone is this: know your game and really know who is the game for.
Yes.
So, and what are the core items you really want the people to experience when they play your game. And then write questions that hone to those things that you are looking, that you expect there to be in the game.
And specifically,
the better you can write, the better you can know your game, and the better you can write questions to meet those items in the game, the more you're going to get out of it.
Right. and specifically things that you are unsure about.
Yeah.
If something is consistently good, you don't really need to ask questions about it because it's consistently good. But if there are any parts that you're unsure about, and writing questions in a way that is not hand-holding to the person. So, like, if you're worried about the money, you may want to ask something like, did you feel like you had enough money? But a better question may be, how did you feel about the economy in the game? Because it lets them draw their own conclusions about how they felt. And also, if you tweak it, maybe now you are afraid that people have too much money. And so you can keep that question in there, even though you made a change, and the answer might be wildly different depending on things, and you'll get more information from people because you don't want them being like, the economy was fine. Did you feel like you had enough money? Yes. Like, try to create questions that will elicit a longer or more thoughtful answer.
Yeah. Another thing is play other people's games. Play other people's playtest games. Play them like crazy. The reason, besides the fact they need people to play, they're begging you, please. But
please play my game, sir.
Please play
I
my
am so
game.
poor. I need playtests.
But the other reason why is you get to read their questions. You know what? You may be the worst at coming up with questions. They may be great at coming up with questions.
You just steal other people's questions.
But well, no, I don't mean steal the actual question. I mean...
Do it. Steal the questions.
But
who are they gonna... They can't sue you.
It might show you what kinds of questions people are asking.
Right.
You know, see what kinds of... It's the same thing with like interviews on a job. Is that there's just better and there's worse job interview questions, and there might be ones that you're gonna see and you're gonna be like, well, they did a great job here, and then you'll be able to.
You see on the playtest form, where do you see this game in 5 years? That's weird.
On my shelf.
Hey, that's good. That's a
great
good
question.
answer. So thanks for watching. We're not entirely sure what we're going to be talking about next time. It may be conventions and how the scene of conventions has been changing. Maybe we're talking about demoing, if you want to pitch to someone, if you want to have more professional people looking at your game. Maybe let us know in the comments below and let us know what you want us to talk about. I would say we're getting closer to the point that we are actually at with our games. There are going to be a couple more episodes before we're all caught up, which is like to the point of getting ready for Kickstarter. So anything up until that point is fair game, and we're happy to talk about it. Just let us know. Also, let us know if you have any other questions about playtesting. Is there some specific question that you think is really good that we didn't mention? Do you have some other ideas about playtesting that we didn't talk about or didn't want to talk about?
So one thing that we should do as a community is come up with good questions.
That's true.
We could, if you make a list of good things to look for in questions and, good ways of phrasing questions. To do a list of the best
playtest questionnaire questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you have a really good question, go ahead and drop that below too. And if we like it, we'll give you a shout out next time. And we'll start compiling these and maybe put them on our website.
Yeah.
Which you can go to at www.luteandloot.com. Always be plugging.
Push the button. Tag this here, somewhere, right here.
And
like and subscribe.
Thanks for watching.